urinary system. So we had finished with urinary. So today we'll be doing the development of the genital system and the reproductive organs. So before we go in for the class, let us understand some core features of Auricle for those who are new on the platform. So here we offer you live classes as well as recorded classes, which you can access anytime, anywhere. And we also give you the notes, which are CBME-based question answers, MCQs. MCQs range from the standard level, that is from the beginner level to the expert level. And they're all standard multiple choice questions, which are asked in the university exams as well as competitive exams. So today we will begin with the class. Okay, so the objectives of today's class are we'll be studying about the development of testes, the male duct system, the male external genital area, the female gonads, that is ovary, fallopian tube, uterus and vagina, and the female external genitalia. So before we understand, just recap some of the basics. So this is the intraembryonic mesoderm, which differentiates into paraxial, intermediate, and lateral plate mesoderm. So from the intermediate mesoderm, we have the what we call it as the genital as well as the urinary system developing from the intermediate mesoderm. So basically, this intermediate mesoderm here, it forms the urogenital ridge. Okay, this is seen in the posterior wall of the coelomic cavity. Okay, so here we have the urogenital ridge. Now, this urogenital ridge differentiates into two, that is, medial portion forms the genital ridge and the lateral portion forms the nephrogenic cord. The entire genital, that is basically the gonads, they are derived from this genital ridge, whereas the urinary system, basically the kidneys and their collecting system is developed from the nephrogenic cord. So this we saw it in the last class. So today we will concentrate on the genital ridge and the structures derived from it. So first, coming to the male genital system. So the male genital external internal genitalia, which includes the prostate gland, okay, the duct system, the seminal vesicles, the ejaculatory ducts, the vas deferens, the epididymis, and the testis, as well as the penis. So all this forms part of the male genital system. So before we go in for each, just generally the gonads, whether it is male or female gonads, they are developed from three sources. That is the intermediate mesoderm, which we saw, which formed the gonadal ridge, the coelomic epithelium. So this is the epithelium, coelomic epithelium, which covers this intermediate mesoderm, and the primordial germ cells. So primordial germ cells, they are derived from the dorsal wall of the yolk sac. Okay, so this is the indifferent stage of development. So what do we mean by that? Indifferent stages. Initially, though the chromosomal sex is established, still it is not expressed here. So, okay, so they are indifferent. So we do not know whether they are going to form the male gonads or the female gonads. Okay, so that is the indifferent stage. So they are not differentiated to form either of it. So now this is the site of development. So where is the site of development of the gonadal ridge? In the posterior coelomic wall, no? So posterior abdominal near the coelom, it develops, okay? So this development, it begins in the 4th week of intrauterine life. So during the 4th week of intrauterine life, the development of the genital system begins. Now, the genetic sex, as I said, it is established at the time of fertilization itself. But the gonads, okay, so these gonads, they do not acquire that male or female morphological characteristics up to the 7th week of development. Okay, so till then, they are not differentiated. So that stage, we call it as the indifferent stage of the gonads. So after the 7th week onwards, the development proceeds in different, that is, if it is going to be a male or female, it proceeds in that direction, and the gonadal sex can be determined morphologically. And by the end of 12th week, okay, some of the male and female characteristics of the external genitalia can be seen. So external genitalia can be actually recognized by the end of 12th week of intrauterine life. Okay, and by the 20th week, the entire phenotype, that is whether it is going to be a male or female, is entirely established. Okay, so this is mainly why this difference occurs is mainly because of the hormonal as well as the chromosomal factors. Okay, now here see, this is the primordial germ cells. So primordial germ cells we see in the dorsal wall. From here, we have these migrate towards the developing gonads and it forms. So we'll see how it happens. Okay, so this is the migration. So yolk sac from the dorsal wall of the yolk sac. Okay, the primordial germ cells are formed and they migrate towards the developing gonads, and that stimulates the further development of the gonads. Okay. So from the dorsal mesentery, this is the hindgut part. So if you can see here, so from here, from this mesentery, it is going and then going towards the developing gonads. Okay. Now, this is the indifferent gonad. Okay. So the gonad where it is developing in the intermediate mesoderm. Okay. In the intermediate, that is from the genital ridge. Okay. So the first indication is the development of the primitive gonad. So primitive gonad, that is the genital ridge, we see it by the 4th week. Okay, so an elongated elevation, which we saw earlier. So this elevation is that is genital ridge, appears on the medial side of the mesonephric, that is the ridge, which this is the mesonephric ridge, that is otherwise called as the nephrogenic cord. So on the medial side of it, we see the genital ridge. So how is this genital ridge formed? It is basically formed by the condensation of the intermediate mesoderm and the proliferation. Here there is the overlying the coelomic epithelium. So the coelomic epithelium as well as the condensation of the intermediate mesoderm, it forms this gonadal ridge. Okay, so this is the first step. Now the primordial germ cells. Okay, so these are the primordial germ cells. These germ cells, they are differentiated in the wall of the yolk sac. Okay, so this is the allantois. So close to the allantois, these primordial germ cells are formed. Okay, and when are they formed? They are formed during the 2nd week of intrauterine life. So during the 4th week, they migrate from here. Okay, so these primordial germ cells, they migrate along the dorsal mesentery now here, which we see, and they reach the gonadal ridges. So when do they reach? By the end of 5th week, or beginning of 5th week. And they will invade this genital ridge by 6th week. Okay, so they invade, understand? So they develop by 2nd week, migration starts by 4th week, reaches by 5th week, and invades by 6th week. So once they arrive, okay, on arrival, what happens of this germ cells into the genital ridge. Now the cells of the surface epithelium, okay, of the genital ridge, that is the coelomic epithelium here. This is the coelomic epithelium. So the cells here, okay, of the coelomic epithelium, they will proliferate. Okay, they start dividing. Okay, they proliferate and they penetrate into the underlying mesenchymal cells. Okay, so they penetrate into that genital ridge. Okay, so means that mesenchymal cells. Okay, so genital ridge, both by the epithelium as well as the mesenchymal cells, it is formed. So now it will penetrate to that. So when it penetrates, it's formed what we call it as the finger-like cords. And these finger-like cords are called as the primitive sex cords. Okay, so these are called as the primitive sex cords. So in both male and female embryos, the primitive sex cords, they are connected to the surface epithelium. Okay, so they are connected here. So both male and female gonads in the initial stage, it progresses in the same way. Okay, so at this stage, it is difficult to say whether it is a male or female gonad. So this stage gonads, we call them as the indifferent gonad. So the outer part of this indifferent gonad, this portion, we call it as the cortex. Okay, and its central part, we call it as the medulla. Okay, so till this stage, the indifferent stage. So again, when we are discussing ovary, I wouldn't be going into this. So it is the same. So whether it is ovary or testis, we have to write about the indifferent stage in the same way. Okay, same thing happens, same process. Okay, so afterwards, the testis and ovary follows a different path. Okay, so that when they form the definitive gonads, we call it as the definitive stage. So how does that happen? Now, if it is the chromosomal sex is male XY, female is XX, isn't it? Okay, so here this thing that is what we call it as the SRY gene. Okay, so this SRY gene, it is located on the short arm of chromosome Y. Okay, short arm of chromosome Y. That is YP11 we say. Okay, SRY gene is located. Now this SRY gene, it codes, okay, it encodes for a protein which we call it as the testis determining factor. Testis determining factor. Okay, so when this testis determining factor is present, okay, what happens? It leads to the differentiation of the testis, development of the male genitalia. Okay, basically the gonads, genital organs. Okay, so as the indifferent, so as this stage, okay, so the gonad, so if because of the presence of the SRY gene and it encodes for the protein TDF, that is the testis determining factor. Okay, what happens is the developing testis, in the developing testis, the formation of Leydig-Sertoli cells is seen, okay, which produce the Mullerian inhibiting factor and testosterone. So this, because of this becomes phenotypically male. Okay, the embryo becomes, the phenotype of the embryo is determined, that is, it becomes a male. Now, in the case of female, what happens? There is absence of the SRY gene. So because of that, there is absence of the TDF factor, the Mullerian inhibiting factor, and testosterone. So that leads to the development of ovary, okay, the female. So this is what you need to know. Now coming to the definitive stage where we are talking about the development of testis. So here the indifferent gonad now, it enters into the definitive stage. Okay, so either it develops into the testis or ovary. So testis means it should have that TDF factor. Okay, so so now if this primordial, now how will it happen? Okay, because of the chromosomal complement, that is Y chromosome should be there. And another thing is this primordial germ cells, okay, they will be carrying that XY sex chromosome. Okay, so okay, so if they carry XY, it develops into male. If it is XX, it develops into a female. So first we see how the development of testis happen. So if the embryo is genetically male, okay, that is the primordial germ cells are carrying XY chromosome. Excuse me. Okay, so if they are carrying that chromosome, so what happens is, as we discussed earlier, so the Y chromosome, what it will have? It will have the SRY gene. And what will that SRY gene do? It will encode for the protein, that is the testis determining factor, okay, determining factor, right? So when that is there, now what happens is this primitive sex cords. Now these are the sex cords, okay? So they will increase in length and they will extend into the central part, okay? So central part, that is the medulla of the indifferent gonad, okay? So they will start extending. So they are extending here. Now these, now we call them as the testicular testis or medullary cords. We call them as the medullary cords. So towards the hilum of the gonads, now here, towards this hilum, okay, so these medullary cords, what happens is they regress, okay, they will regress and they will break up into tiny cell strands, okay. See, these are all the cell strands. They break up into the tiny cell strands, and these cell strands, they will anastomose with each other. Okay, now the sex cords. So at this point, what happens is, so they are anastomosed here, and now the sex cords, they become U-shaped. Okay, so U-shaped or horseshoe-shaped they become. So once they become horseshoe-shaped, they get canalized. Okay, canalized in the center, and that we call it as the seminiferous tubules. And this anastomosing the cell strands, no, they also get canalized, okay? And they form what we call it as the rete testis. So when we see the gross anatomy of testis, what do we say? So from the seminiferous tubule is highly coiled, and at its ends it becomes straight, isn't it? And they form a network, which we call it as all the straight tubules from each of the seminiferous tubules. They all join to form the rete testis, we say. Okay, so how that is formed is, this is how it is formed, okay? So what happens here at its, this end, okay, nearer the medullary end, no, that is towards the hilum, these medullary cords, they will regress and they form cell strands, which will anastomose with each other. Then the sex cords, they become, that is the medullary cords, they become horseshoe shaped and they get canalized to form the seminiferous tubules. And these cell strands also, no, they will also get canalized and they form the retitestis. So in the fourth month, okay, fourth month of intrauterine life, fourth month. So fourth month means around 16th week, okay. So communication is established between the seminiferous tubules and the retitestis, okay. Now the seminiferous tubules, they are lined by, now if you see here, there are some cells which are bluish and some are red, no? So they are lined by two types of cells, okay. So they are called as the, let me see here. So seminiferous tubules, they are lined by two types of cells. One is the sex cord cells, which are derived from the surface coelomic epithelium, okay. So sex cord cells, they are derived from the coelomic epithelium, and there are cells which are derived from the primordial germ cells, okay. So which are derived from the yolk sac, wall of the yolk sac. Now these primordial germ cells, they form the spermatogonia, okay. So the primordial germ cells, they form the spermatogonia, whereas the cells which are the sex cord cells which were derived from the coelomic epithelium, they form the this thing. What is that? Sertoli cells, okay. Sustentacular cells of Sertoli, okay. So that is how it differentiates, okay. So the primordial germ cells, they form the spermatogonia, whereas the cells derived from the primordial germ cells, they form the spermatogonia, whereas those derived from the coelomic epithelium form the Sertoli cells. Okay. Now the mesenchyme. Okay, so the mesenchyme, which is below these cells, okay, below the coelomic epithelium, it forms a tough fibrous covering, okay, around this developing testis and separates it from the surface, that is the coelom. This is the coelomic epithelium. So because of this proliferation of these mesenchymal cells, it forms a tough covering, okay, which we call it as the tunica albuginea, and that will separate it from the outside cells, that is the coelomic epithelium. And this fibrous layer, it sends the septa and divides this into many lobes and lobules, okay. So it will divide. So and this mesoderm, this side, it will also form at this end, okay, near the retitestis. After that, it also forms the mediastinum testis. So mediastinum testis, what do we say? It is basically the thickening of this tunica albuginea, right? So that is at the posterior surface of the testis, it will form. So posterior side, right? So here we see the formation of the mediastinum testis. Okay, so the fibrous septa, this will, as I said, it will divide it into various lobes. So mesoderm around this, okay, around the seminiferous tubules. So whatever mesoderm is present between that, it will form which cells? The interstitial cells of Leydig. Okay, so by 8th week of intrauterine life, these interstitial cells of Leydig will start secreting this testosterone, and that will influence the further development and differentiation of the male genital organs. Okay, so basically from the mesonephric duct, okay, and the external genitalia development, whatever the structures, that is the duct system of the male genital organs, no? So that, as well as the external genitalia, it depends on this testosterone, which is secreted by the interstitial cells of the Leydig. Okay, right. So the tubules. Now what happens is from here, from this retitestis, the tubules will extend. Okay, so they will extend into, this is the mesonephric duct. Okay, so mesonephric duct, where we are getting the mesonephric duct. Mesonephric duct is forming from that mesonephros. Okay, so mesonephros, what happens? It disappears, but the duct as well as the tubules, they remain. Correct. So those tubules, no, they form the efferent ductules, which forms the head of the epididymis. And all these efferent ductules, they'll be opening into this mesonephric duct, which will form the duct of the epididymis. Okay, and that will continue as the vas deferens. Okay, so they are all, so vas deferens. So vas deferens will go and join the, which one? Vas deferens. Then we have the seminal vesicles. and the ejaculatory duct. Okay, so they form the ejaculatory duct, seminal vesicle duct, they join the vas deferens and the seminal vesicles, it joins to form the ejaculatory duct. So till there, okay, the entire duct system, it will be derived from the mesonephric. We'll come to that again, but just remember this. Okay, so this is how the development occurs. Okay, so these medullary cords, okay, which are present now. So these medullary cords, okay, so they remain solid. Okay, though they remain solid, they do not function. Okay, basically till puberty. So after that, spermatogonia develop and they form the sperms only after puberty, when the seminiferous tubules are formed by the canalization. Okay, so that is why seminoma, the testicular tumor, no, before puberty it doesn't occur. So after puberty only it forms, because that seminoma, that tumor, it basically arises from the seminiferous tubules. Okay, so that is about the development of the testis. Okay, so next is how the testis descends. So testis will be attached, okay, behind. So it is developing here. Okay, so this is the mesonephric duct. Okay, so the lower pole of the testis is attached, okay, below by the gubernaculum. Okay, this is known as the gubernaculum testis. And this gubernaculum testis will be attached partly to the peritoneum, to the duct here. Okay, that is the mesonephric duct, as well as to the lower pole of the developing testis. So as the fetus grows, what happens? The shortening of this gubernaculum testis, and the lower end will be attached to the base of the developing scrotum. So it gets pulled. So the testis, because it is attached also to the peritoneum, a portion of the peritoneum also, okay, it will come along with it, which forms the outer covering. Okay, after it descends to the scrotum, what happens? That portion, it forms the it gets obliterated. Okay, so here, okay, this it gets obliterated. That processus vaginalis, we say, the portion which is of the peritoneum which is coming down. Okay, and it gets obliterated, and the remaining portion, it forms the outer covering, that is the tunica vaginalis, okay, of the testis. So, and this is the gubernaculum, which gets here, where it fixes this testis to the base of the scrotum. So, if the testis doesn't descend, okay, we call it as cryptorchidism, and it can at different positions, okay, because usually what happens when the testis descends, okay, so the testis, so by the so testis is developing where? Up in the near the lumbar region. Okay, so it reaches the iliac fossa by about 4th month of intrauterine life. Okay, and it remains there up to the 7th. During the 7th, it will come to the deep inguinal ring. During the 8th month of intrauterine life, it will traverse the inguinal canal, and at birth, it will descend into the scrotum. Okay, so that is how the descent of the testis happens. So sometimes it may not descend, and that is called as undescended testis or cryptorchidism, and the testis can be at different levels. Okay, you may see. So you may see it in the iliac fossa, or some at the deep inguinal ring, or in the inguinal canal, or superficial inguinal ring, or just outside the superficial inguinal ring. Okay. Another thing is ectopic testis. Now what happens is the lower end of this gubernaculum would be attached. It sends from fibers, and it will be attached to the pubic bone near the inguinal canal, okay, in the groin region, and all sends the fibers, which we call it as the fibers of Lockwood. So sometimes the testis, instead of going to the scrotum, it may go towards those where those septa are there. Okay, so it may remain. So when it has descended, but it has not descended to the scrotum, but instead it is seen either in the groin region, that is in near the upper part of the thigh, or near the pubic bone, okay, or in the abdomen level here in the upper part. Okay, so that we call it as the ectopic testis. Then if that processes, usually the processus vaginalis, it obliterates after the descent of the testis. But sometimes if it doesn't obliterate, what happens? This is nothing but the peritoneal covering, isn't it? So the peritoneum itself, covering has come down. So what happens? The peritoneal cavity is making a communication through this with the testis. So what happens is, because of that, the fluid, the peritoneal secretions, okay, they will also get accumulated. Okay, so they get accumulated in the tunica vaginalis. Okay, so that is called as the hydrocele. So it's basically the fluid from the peritoneal cavity which is getting filled within this tunica vaginalis. So that happens because of the patent processus vaginalis. So usually it should obliterate, but it has not obliterated and it causes that. Okay, and sometimes even because of this patent processus vaginalis, even the intestinal content, intestines, abdominal content, basically the intestines can also come into the, which we through this inguinal canal. Okay, and that we call it as the inguinal hernia. So these are all, okay, so that usually inguinal hernia, the indirect kind, okay, happens. So indirect is congenital. So basically because of this defect. So source is, what are the sources now? So development of testes, how are you going to talk about? So the gonads, they develop by three sources. One is the coelomic epithelium, the genital ridge, as well as the primordial germ cells. So you should talk about the indifferent stage and the indefinite stage and the definite. So when does the development start? So the development starts actually by the, because the primordial germ cells are formed by second week, and actually the testicular development differentiation happens by fourth week. Okay, that is the genital ridge formation. And after that, these primordial germ cells, they migrate there. Okay, so they invade by, they reach by fifth, and by sixth week, they will invade. Okay, so and the testis development is completed by when? By fourth month of intrauterine life. So site is in the posterior, that is posterior wall of the coelomic cavity. Okay, so posterior wall. So process of development, you will talk about the indifferent stage and the definitive stage, then descent of the testis, and mention the anomalous. So development of the ducts. Okay, so development of genital ducts. So here, if when we see, okay, so the now we will talk about the male genital ducts. So now before we go into that, now we should understand this is those two ridges. This is the intermediate mesoderm, which has differentiated into genital ridge and the nephrogenic cord. So genital ridge has formed gonads, and this is the nephrogenic cord, which has now here we had the different stages, no? The pronephros, mesonephros, and the metanephros. So this is in the region of mesonephros. Okay. So mesonephros region. So this is the mesonephric, these are the tubules of mesonephros, mesonephric tubules, as this well as the mesonephric duct. Okay. And next to that, from the coelom, okay, so from the, which one? So this duct, okay, so this mesonephric duct, no, we call it as the Wolffian duct. Okay, mesonephric duct is also called as the Wolffian duct. Whereas the paramesonephric duct develops. So in the paramesonephric duct, it is actually developing from the coelomic epithelium. Okay. The paramesonephric duct. So what happens here now? The male, okay, so this is the so the funnel shaped opening of this, that is basically that from the coelomic epithelium, we have this duct developing paramesonephric, which develops next to the mesonephric. That is why it's called as paramesonephric. Now the male, okay, so this is initial, this is the undifferentiated stage. So based on the formation of that SRY gene and the presence of SRY gene and testiculars determining factor, the differentiation either progresses in the direction of male or female, right? So in the male, what happens? Most of the duct, all the duct system, that is basically the, which one? The efferent ductules, the epididymis, the vas deferens, then we have the seminal vesicles, the ejaculatory duct. Okay, everything is developed from which one? The mesonephric duct. Okay, Whereas the paramesonephric duct in the females, it will form the female duct system, that is the fallopian tube. Okay, and also it forms the uterus as well as the upper part of the vagina. Okay, so this mesonephric duct, we call it as the Wolffian duct, and the paramesonephric duct, we call it as the Mullerian duct. Okay, right. So this is the genital ducts here. So this is what we see, the duct of the epididymis. So vasa efferentia, that is different ductules of the testis. The duct of the epididymis. Then we have the vas deferens. Then the seminal vesicles. Okay, with joints, it forms the ejaculatory duct. Up to here, okay, in the prostate part, no, up to here, where it opens in the prostate part of the urethra. So these are developed from which duct? The mesonephric duct. So mesonephric duct is very important in the development of the duct system in the males. Okay. So what happens to the paramesonephric duct then? So the paramesonephric duct in males, okay, it will disappear. Okay, it will degenerate. And it remains as the appendix of the testis. Okay, paramesonephric duct remains as the appendix of the testis. So you will see, a small sessile body near the upper pole of the testis. That is called as the appendix of the testis. Okay, so it remains as that. Okay, so it forms appendix as well as it also forms this one, that is the prostatic utricle. Okay, prostatic utricle is a small blind sac which opens into the posterior wall of the prostatic urethra. Okay, so prostatic in females, it is homologous to the uterus. Okay, and the vagina. But here it is from the prostatic utricle. So these are the two structures, that is the appendix of the testis and prostatic utricle, which form from the, what is that? Paramesonephric duct. Okay. There is appendix of the epididymis also. Appendix of the epididymis, we see it for the epididymis. That is a part of the, this one, mesonephric duct. Okay. Mesonephric duct, which we see. Clear with this? So these are the structures. Okay. So mesonephric duct in males, no, the other structures which will remain in the males is, okay, vestigial remnants of the mesonephric duct. What we see one is the appendix of the epididymis. Okay, so it is derived from the mesonephric duct. Then we have paradidymis, then superior aberrant ductules and inferior aberrant ductules. Okay. So before, now here see the efferent ductules begin, isn't it? So some of the ductules above it and some ductules below it, below the developing testis, remain as superior aberrant ductules and inferior aberrant ductules. Okay. So from the paramesonephric duct, the remnant is, one is appendix of the testis, another one is the prostatic utricle. So these are the things. Okay. So it is very important, very commonly asked, the derivatives of mesonephric and paramesonephric duct in males and females. So basically you can make columns, write about male, female, the duct, what are the structures derived from that, okay, and what are the remnants. Okay, so just to summarize again. Okay, so we will write okay. So the which one? The paramesonephric duct. Okay. So before that mesonephric duct. Okay. Mesonephric duct. So mesonephric duct mainly in males. Males, what it forms? It forms the efferent ductules. Okay. Efferent ductules. Then epididymis, duct of the epididymis. Then vas deferens. Then it forms the seminal vesicle. Okay, and then what does it form? Ejaculatory duct. Okay, so these are the structures derived from the mesonephric duct in males. Whereas what are the remnants of it? Mesonephric. In males, what do we see? Mesonephric duct remnants. We see the appendix of the epididymis. Appendix of epididymis. Okay. Then we see the superior aberrant and inferior aberrant. Okay, ductules. Right, superior aberrant and inferior aberrant ductules. Then we see paradidymis. Okay, so these are the four things which are the remnants of mesonephric duct. Paramesonephric duct in males completely disappears. Okay, paramesonephric disappears, doesn't form anything. And remnants, basically this disappears. And the remnants form only two structures. One is the appendix of the testis. Okay, and it forms the prostatic utricle. Okay, so this is very important. You can make the list and write it. It is as commonly as a 3 marks or 5 mark question. Next is the development of the prostate gland. Okay, so development of the prostate. So prostate gland is one of the important organs in the development of the male structures, isn't it? So male reproductive system. So here, so this is so where is the location of the prostate gland? So prostate gland is basically located near the neck of the bladder. Okay, it encloses near the neck of the bladder. We have the prostate gland. Now, the prostate gland will have different, this is the transitional zone. It has the peripheral divided into different zones okay. And through the prostate, we have the prostatic urethra passing through it. Okay, prostatic part. And there are many structures which opens into the prostate. So that is why we will see what are the structure, how it is developed. So the prostate gland, it develops, okay. So from 5 epithelial buds. Okay, so from the 5 epithelial, there are 5 epithelial buds. Okay, so from these 5 epithelial buds, we have the formation of the prostate gland. Now from where does these epithelial buds come from? They come from the epithelial lining of the prostatic urethra. So now this is the prostatic urethra. So the epithelial lining, okay, so the epithelial lining of this prostatic urethra forms these epithelial buds. And from here, we have this prostate gland developing. So there are one anterior, okay, so there will be one anterior and 2 posterior, okay, one anterior, 2 posterior and 2 lateral, okay, buds. So one anterior, posterior and 2 lateral buds will be there. So these are the epithelial buds. So the buds which are arising from the mesodermal, that is the posterior wall of the urethra, above the opening of the ejaculatory ducts, okay, this is the ejaculatory duct, okay. So the buds arising from the mesodermal portion, that is this one, okay, they form the inner glandular zone of the gland, okay, that is of the prostate gland. They form the inner glandular zone, okay. Whereas the buds which are arising from the rest of the prostatic urethra, which are endodermal in origin, they form the outer glandular zone of the prostate. And the surrounding mesoderm, okay, whatever the mesoderm is around that, it forms the dense fibrous stroma. So this is what I say this portion. So this portion was formed from the mesoderm which was above, okay, whereas this was formed from below. Okay, that is, this was the inner glandular zone and this was the outer glandular zone. Then this is the fibrous stroma. So surrounding mesoderms, they form mesoderm. It forms the dense fibrous stroma and the smooth muscles of the prostatic gland and also forms the capsule of the prostate gland. Okay. So this is how, and into it, all the that is the ejaculatory duct opens, the prostatic glands, and there are opening of the prostatic glands, prostatic utricle, all is present there. Okay. So that is about the development of the prostate gland. So next is the formation of the external male genitalia. Okay, so this is important. Now, where does the external genitalia develop? That develops in relation to the cloacal membrane. So cloacal membrane, this is the now initial part. Okay, so this is the hind gut. Now this is the allantois. This is the pre-allantoic part. This is the post-allantoic part. Now the post-allantoic part is divided by a developing urorectal septum into two portions. That is the primitive urogenital sinus in the front and the primitive rectum behind by this urorectal septum. Okay, and here now there will be the cloacal membrane. So this will be the cloacal membrane. So now we are concerned with this. Now this urogenital sinus will be divided into two parts. Okay, so above the opening, we saw this in the last class, right? So above the opening of mesonephric duct, we call it as the vesicourethral part, canal part. Okay, and below that will be the urogenital part. Okay, this one. So this portion is again divided into pelvic part here. Okay, so upper part will form the that is the bladder. Okay, so here we have the pelvic and the phallic part. Okay, so this is the phallic part of the urogenital sinus. This is the pelvic part of the urogenital sinus, whereas this portion forms the vesicourethral part. This form the what is that bladder, and this will form the we have the prostatic prostatic urethra and part will all form from this portion. Okay, now this portion is the phallic part. Now here this membrane is the urogenital membrane now in relation to the urogenital sinus, definitive urogenital sinus. This side, this is the anal membrane. So the cloacal membrane is divided into these two parts. Okay, so this is the initial stage. Now, what happens now we are seeing, so this is in the section we are seeing. Now if you see from the bottom, okay, from below, it looks like this. This is the cloacal membrane. Okay, so during the around the fourth week, the embryonic mesoderm grows around this cloacal membrane. Okay, so embryonic mesoderm will grow around this cloacal membrane and it forms two folds, which we call it as the cloacal folds. So cranial to the cloacal membrane, okay, cranial to the cloacal membrane, what happens is these folds will unite to form the genital tubercle, okay, genital tubercle. Caudally, okay, each fold is subdivided into two parts, okay, caudally it will be divided into two parts, okay, and okay, and the larger anterior part, this is called as the urethral fold, whereas the smaller posterior part is called as the anal fold. Then with the development of the urorectal septum, it is divided. Okay, so here it will be divided. Now the cloacal membrane will be divided, right, by the urorectal septum. So this portion forms the perineal body here. So the anterior part now, we call it as this urogenital membrane, whereas this posterior part forms the anal membrane. Now, this genital tubercle and this urethral fold, which are there now, they are related to which one now? To the urogenital part. Okay. They are in relation to this urogenital membrane. So, during this time, there will be one more swelling which will develop. Okay. So, this swelling, we call it as the genital swelling. Okay. So, genital swelling appears. So which develops on either side of the urethral fold. So at this stage, the urogenital membrane, okay, in whether it is male or female, it is related on each side to two things. One is this, there is this urethral fold, okay, medially, and the genital fold laterally. And genital tubercle is anterior. This is the initial, this is the indifferent stage. Okay. So indifferent stage, both in males and females, it will be the same. So till then, the morphological, that is the phenotypic sex, is not determined. So it remains the same. So after that, once the phenotype that is, it is established, the definitive stage happens. Okay. The development progresses in that direction. So now under the influence, now if it has to develop into male, so what happens? We need the male hormones, isn't it? So testosterone and dihydrotestosterone. So what secretes this? The interstitial cells of the lady, they will secrete. So from the fetal testis, these hormones are secreted. So when these hormones are secreted, the development progresses towards the development of external genitalia of males. Okay, so this is what is happening. So that time what happens? This genital tubercle. So where is the genital tubercle now? It is in the anteriorly. This genital tubercle enlarges rapidly. Okay, and it becomes cylindrical. It becomes cylindrical to form what we call it as the phallus or the primitive penis. Okay, so the enlargement, this enlargement of this phallus, it forms the penis. Okay, so that forms the penis. So next what happens is, now the penis has been formed. Now the penile urethra has to form. Okay. Yeah. So here what happens is, as the phallus, now this phallus is elongating, it pulls along with it the primitive urethral folds. Okay. So these are the urethral folds. So this is growing. So along with it, it is pulling this urethral folds also. Okay. So urethral folds are pulled along with it. And with the extension of the primitive urethral folds on the undersurface of the phallus, the primitive urethral groove, this groove is also extending, isn't it? So along with the urethral fold, the primitive urethral groove also gets extended. And it extends up to the tip of the phallus. Okay. So that is, this is the developing glans penis. So up to that tip, it will extend. Now, during this time, what happens? The phallic part of the urogenital sinus, that was the above part. Okay, so this portion, this is the phallic part of it, right? So this phallic part of the urogenital sinus will also extend up to the base of the developing penis. Okay, so the phallic part. So, yeah. So the phallic part of it will also extend there. So where is that? Yeah. So the phallic part of the urogenital sinus also extends up to the base of the developing glans penis. Now the endodermal, so if you see here you can see. This is the phallic part of the urogenital sinus. So that also will extend. Now the endodermal epithelium. Now this phallic part is what? It is derived from the hindgut, isn't it? And hindgut is what? It is basically the endoderm part, isn't it? So now this endodermal lining of the phallic part of the urogenital sinus, okay, it will proliferate to form what we call it as the urethral plate. Okay, so this is the urethral plate. And this urethral plate also will extend, okay, forwards along with the phallus. Okay, along the floor of this primitive urethral. Now, this is the primitive urethral groove. So, along that, this also will progress. Okay, to the base of the developing glans penis. So, this is the base of the developing glans penis. Up to there, that will also progress. Now, this is a solid urethral plate because it is formed by the proliferation of those endodermal cells. Now, that plate, it gets canalized. Okay, it gets canalized and forms a hollow tube. Okay, so this now the bilaminar, now this urogenital membrane, it will separate this newly formed endodermal tube from the primitive urethral groove. Okay, so the membrane is between these two. Okay, membrane is between the canal formed by this urethral plate as well as by the primitive urethral groove. So now after that, this membrane now breaks. Okay, so the membrane breaks now. So because of the breakdown of the membrane, that is the urogenital membrane, okay, so it forms a definitive urethral groove because both will fuse now. The membrane is gone. So above that urethral plate and the primitive urethral groove, they will become one. So because of that, there is a formation of the definitive urethral groove. Okay, so this is the definitive urethral groove. And by the end of the third month, two urethral grooves, okay, the folds, okay, they will fuse, okay, which we see here. Okay, so breaks to form the definite urethral groove, and which is actually on the either side of that we have this urethral folds, isn't it? So by the end of the third month, the two urethral folds will fuse. Okay, so from the cranial to the caudal direction, it starts fusing. So here we can see that. Okay, so there is fusion of the urethral folds. Okay, so and that forms the penile urethra. Okay, so that forms, I am combining both the urethral formation and the external genitalia. It goes hand in hand here. Okay, so here you can see actually, so this is the definitive urethral fold. So it will fuse and it will fuse in the and forms the penile urethra. So this penile urethra, up to where it extends, up to the base of the glans penis, it extends. Okay. Now the surface ectoderm, now here what happens is the surface ectoderm, okay, fuses in the median plane of the penis to form the penile raphe. Okay, so penile raphe is here in the surface, that is below. This is the surface ectoderm. Okay, so this will fuse in the median plane of the penis and it forms the penile raphe. That is what we call it as this one. This is the penile raphe. Okay, so penile raphe is formed. That is the surface ectoderm. So that is one line you see it, no, on the when the gross appearance of the penis, we can see that. Now the spongy part of the penile urethra, okay, spongy part of the penile urethra, which is formed, extends only up to, now this will extend till where? Only up to the base of the glans. So during the fourth month, the ectodermal cells from the tip of the glans penis penetrate inward and form a, now here. Okay, so this, this portion. So this portion form the spongy urethra now. This is fusion of the genital folds. This is the spongy urethra, or the penile urethra we say. So now this portion, okay. So the cord canalizes. Now it forms basically here what happens, this glans penis, no? So from the tip, okay, here we can see it better. So this tip, there's proliferate, which now these cells are from the surface ectoderm. Okay, so these cells, they will proliferate and they form a solid ectodermal epithelial cord. Okay, so this epithelial cord will canalize and it forms the terminal part of the urethra and it forms the external urethral meatus. Okay, so that is how the entire, so basically see, you should know that the urethral portion near the glans, no, it is derived from the ectoderm, whereas remaining was from the endoderm. Next is the development of prepuce of the penis. So here what happened, now close to the tip of the phallus, a circular sulcus, okay, all around a circular sulcus will form. That is known as the coronal sulcus will appear, okay, close to the tip of the phallus. So this will separate the glans from the rest of the penis. So here around here, all around, there will be a coronal sulcus. Now the surface ectoderm, okay, this is the surface ectoderm covering the glans. It will proliferate and it will grow inwards. Okay, so the cells are proliferating and they are growing inwards here. So as they grow inward, what happens? It forms a double layer fold. Okay, so like this, it forms a double layer fold here. So, so this is the double layer fold of the ectoderm. Later, these two layers of the ectoderm, what happens? They will separate. Okay, the two layers, they will separate from each other to form the prepuce. Okay, they form the prepuce. And the prepuce, we can retract up to the, that is the sulcus. Okay, it can be retracted behind and it easily slides over the surface of the glans penis. So next what happens? The scrotum. So after the fusion of these urethral folds, so urethral folds are there. So next to that urethral fold, what folds were there? There were two, genital swellings, isn't it? These genital swellings, now what happens is they move medially and fuse with each other to form the scrotum. So the scrotum will lie below the root of the, so this was the fusion of the genital fold. This is the primitive urethral opening, which was formed by the ectoderm here near the glans, right? And now these two, that is the genital swellings which were present, they will fuse now and they will form what we call it as the scrotum. Okay. So each scrotal swelling forms that each of this will form the half of the scrotum, and the two halves, they are separated from each other by the scrotal septum that is in the center. Okay. So here there will be a septum. So the line of fusion of these folds in the midline, we call it as the scrotal, or forms the scrotal raphe. Okay. So now, because of this, okay, because of the origin of the urethra, male urethra, from two different sources, okay, there are two common conditions which arise. One is hypospadiasis, another one is the epispadiasis. So hypospadias is a very common congenital condition anomaly. Okay, so in this condition, the external urethral orifice, no, it is located on the ventral aspect of the penis. This is the ventral aspect of the penis, okay? Whereas this surface, we call it as the dorsal aspect of the penis. So instead of the tip, it is opening here, okay? So this because what happens here, this ectodermal cells, no, they failed to canalize. They formed a cord, but they did not canalize and they did not unite here, okay? So that is why this, what is that, urethral opening is on the ventral surface. So because of that, what happens, no, this penis is underdeveloped and it will be curved ventrally, okay? So that condition, we call it as the chordate. So when it opens here on the dorsal aspect, we call it as the epispadiasis. So hypospadias, we have different types based on where it opens. Like, we have the glandular, then we have the coronal, okay, near the coronal sulcus, then the penile part, pinoscrotal, okay, perineal. So this like that, we have the different types of hypospadiasis. So epispadiasis, the urethral orifice is located on the dorsal aspect of the penis. It is also a very rare anomaly, okay, which we see. It occurs in about 1 in 30,000 births. So usually that is also associated with extrophy of the bladder. See, you can see the extrophy of the urinary bladder, ectopy vesicae, okay? So these are the things. Another thing is phimosis. It's a common condition. So in phimosis, what happens? The prepuce, okay? So there's the fold which covers the glands of the penis. So this prepuce, it develops around the 12th week of intrauterine life. So it remains adherent, okay, to the glands, and it remains like that up to 3 years of age, okay? And usually it cannot be easily retracted, okay? So if it is not easily retracted, then we call that condition as phimosis, okay? It will be tight. So because of that, there will be like, the tip of the penis, there will be swelling. So in case if it is very difficult, because if it is so, what happens is there is collection, there is no proper passage of the urine, and it results in poor weight gain of the baby and, repeated urinary infections and all. In that cases, they do what we call it as the circumcision. Okay, so these are the things which you should know. So going to the female reproductive system now. So female reproductive system, we have the uterus, okay, the ovaries, the fallopian tubes, the vagina. Okay, so these are the parts of the female reproductive system. So we will start from the development of the gonads. So this is the undifferentiated stage of the gonads. So the initial development is the same, okay? So the migration of the primordial germ cells, then stimulation of the coelomic epithelium, all that remains the same, okay? So once if the genital sex is female, what happens, that is basically if the primordial cells are carrying the XXY chromosome complement, these indifferent gonads, they develop into the ovary. So the primitive sex cords here, okay, these are the primitive sex cords or medullary cords, okay, here containing the primordial germ cells. Here, unlike that one, they do not become prominent, okay? They are not very prominent. So you can see it very, right? They do not become very prominent, but they extend into the medulla, okay? they extend into the medulla, and these cords, they dissociate into irregular cell clusters. Okay, they will dissociate and form irregular cell clusters, which we call it as the rete ovary. Okay, rete ovary we call. So this will occupy the medullary part of the ovary, developing ovary. Okay, so and this will be closer to the mesonephric tubules. So later on, what happens, because the mesonephros doesn't have much role in the development of the females, isn't it? Female genital tract. So they, when it with the disappearance, what happens? They will degenerate and they are replaced by the vascular stroma. Okay, so basically vascular tissue you will see in the medulla. That is why in the ovary, when we see in the histological section, you might have noticed, so we see more vascular tissue there. Vascular stroma is present there. Now here the surface epithelium, that is, here we call it as, because it forms the sex cord cells, no? The sex cords it forms. So that is why we call it as the germinal epithelium. So this will continue to proliferate. Okay, in the males it stops because of the development of tunica albuginea and all those things. No, it will stop, right? But here it will continue. And in the 7th week, okay, it forms second generation of sex cords. Okay, so first generation, it all formed all these things. And again, second generation, it forms. Okay, second generation of sex containing the primordial germ cells. And these primordial germ cells, they do not, now this one will not extend into the medulla. So now this we call them as the cortical cords. Okay, earlier we were calling it as medullary cords. Now we call them as the cortical cords. Now these cortical cords, what happens is, in the 3rd month of intrauterine life, they will get fragmented. Okay, they get fragmented and they form isolated cell clusters. Okay, so isolated cell clusters. So if you see here, each cell cluster will be having, it consists of a primordial germ cell. So this primordial germ cell is in the center and surrounded by a layer of coelomic epithelial cells. Okay, so this primordial germ cell, which is there here, okay, so that primordial germ cell, which was derived from the yolk sac, it forms the oogonia, and the coelomic epithelial cells, they form the follicular cells. Okay, so this structure, we call it as, what we call it as the primordial follicles. So all the primordial follicles, they are, if you see, they are only confined to the cortex. Okay, so these, they are formed only during primordial follicles. They are formed only during the fetal life. We do not see it after the birth. Okay, they don't form after the birth. So now the mesoderm here, unlike in the males, it does not form the thick fibrous layer, okay, around the ovary. It doesn't, like tunica albuginea, it doesn't form. Okay. So the ovarian follicles here, they are not separated from the surface epithelium. So ovarian follicles, they are not separated from the surface epithelium of the ovary. And the surface epithelium of the ovary now, it will get flattened. Okay. It flattens to form a single layer of cells that is continuous with the peritoneum near the hilum of the ovary. And the layer of these cells, now we call them as the germinal epithelium. Okay, though it doesn't contribute later on to form any new cells, still we call it because of its earlier function. Okay, so the mesoderm, after that, it forms a thick connective tissue covering for the ovary, and connective tissue, okay, it later on, the mesoderm will form a thin connective tissue. It doesn't form a thick connective tissue. It forms a thin connective tissue covering the ovary, and it also forms the connective tissue stroma of the ovary. And this ovary, later on, it gets suspended from the posterior abdominal wall by the mesentery called as the mesoovarium, because it is still attached to the peritoneum. Understand? So because of that, it will be suspended by this mesoovarium. Okay. So next, how the ovary descends. Okay, so the descent of the ovary, when we see, okay, so the ovary, as we know, it develops in the posterior wall or abdominal wall, in the upper So basically in the upper lumbar region, in the posterior abdominal wall, it develops. Okay. So from there, it has to descend. Where it has to descend, it has to come to the pelvis. Okay. So it will be lying in its lateral wall in the ovarian fossa, right? So here, if you see, just like how in the testis, it was attached to the gubernaculum, here also we have the ovary is attached, okay, by a genital swelling. The caudal end is attached to the genital swelling, that is by a fibrous. Genital swelling means, which is the genital swelling? Just now when we saw the development, no, there was a genital swelling, right, formed on either side of the urethral folds. So to that genital swelling, this fibromuscular structure band is there, which will be attached, okay, to the genital swelling. So that is known as the gubernaculum ovary. So this descent of the ovary occurs because of the pull of this gubernaculum. So its descent is arrested at the pelvis itself because of the development of the uterus and the broad ligament. So the ovary doesn't come completely down here. It is arrested because these structures are developed. Okay, and the gubernaculum gets attached to the angle of the developing uterus. So because of that, it divides into two parts, the proximal part and the distal part. So the proximal part of the gubernaculum, it draws the ovary into the pelvic cavity, and that we call it as the ligament of the ovary. Whereas the distal part, we call it as the round ligament of the uterus. Okay, this portion we call it as the round ligament of the uterus, and this portion we call it as the ligament of the ovary. So the round ligament of the uterus passes through the inguinal canal and it is attached. It terminates in the labia majora. Okay, labia majora, it's at. So during the descent of this ovary, what happens? A tubular prolongation of the peritoneum. Like, they're like how we had in the male, which formed the tunica vaginalis. Same here also, there is a tubular prolongation of the peritoneum, which we call it as the processus vaginalis. Here we call it as the canal of Nag. Okay, so that also extends into the inguinal canal. Okay, so usually it obliterates, but if it doesn't obliterate, what happens? The ovary can go for form a content of the inguinal hernia. So it can also herniate there. Okay, so these are the things which you should remember for the development of the ovary. So this is basically comparison between the two male and female gonads. So testis, it forms only one type of generation of sex cord cells. Okay. Here it forms two generations in ovaries, that is first generation and second generation. First generation medullary cords forms the stroma of the ovarian medulla. Second generation forms the primordial follicles. Okay. Here there is formation of tunica albuginea. Here there is no formation of tunica albuginea. So the ovarian follicles, they are not separated from the surface epithelium. Then is for development of the paramesonephric duct in females. Okay, so paramesonephric duct, as I told you, it is developed from the coelomic epithelium. Okay, so the paramesonephric duct, what happens here? If you see the mesenchyme, this is the coelomic epithelium. This is the nephrogenic cord. Okay, so the paramesonephric duct, it develops lateral to the mesonephric ducts. Okay, so by the invagination of the coelomic epithelium. Okay, so this will extend like, caudally in front of the mesonephric duct from lateral to medial side and comes closer, okay, in the midline. So if you see, okay, so here you can see it crosses. This is the mesonephric, this is the paranephronis. It crosses here, okay, in the midline. So here, when it crosses here, what happens? The two paramesonephric duct, they will unite together, fuse together in the midline to form a vertical duct. Okay, that we call it as the uterovaginal canal. So upper ends of the paramesonephric duct, they will remain open into the coelomic cavity. Okay, so they remain open into the coelomic cavity. Okay, that is why, in females we say the peritoneal cavity is a open cavity because it communicates. What is the communication? This is the communication. Okay. Right. So the caudal end of the uterovaginal canal, it grows downwards and comes in contact with the dorsal part. We will see that later. Okay, dorsal part of the phallic part of the urogenital sinus. So how those further things happen, we will see. So now what are the structures derived from this paramesonephric duct? We have the fallopian tube, the uterus, okay, and the upper part of the vagina. Okay, so the fused part forms the uterus. This forms the fallopian tube. Okay. And remnants of the mesonephric duct in females. Mesonephric duct in females forms the, okay, so paramesonephric duct forms this female reproductive system. Whereas the mesonephric duct, it disappears. No, it doesn't have much function in females. And its remnant form epophoron, paraophoron, okay, and the Gartner's duct. Okay, Gartner's duct. These are the things derived from the remnants of mesonephric duct. So the fallopian tube, okay, so yeah. So the fallopian tube on each side, it is formed by which one? The unfused part of the paramesonephric duct, okay. So it has got a cranial part, okay. So the cranial, vertical and the middle part, like if you see here, this cranial part, then the vertical part and the middle part. Okay. So of the paramesonephric, so cranial part, the vertical and the middle part, they all form the middle horizontal part, all of it, it forms what? It forms the fallopian tube. And this fallopian tube, it will elongate and become tortuous. So the original site of evagination, okay, of the paramesonephric duct from the coelomic cavity forms this. That is where the coelomic cavity projected, invaginated, right? So that becomes the abdominal ostium or the abdominal opening of the uterine tube. So the fimbriae will develop later on, okay, around the margin of that ostium. Next is development of the uterus. Okay, so development of the uterus is how? So the uterus is formed, okay, uterus is formed by the fusion of the uterovaginal canal. So uterovaginal canal, how it is formed? By the fusion of the two paramesonephric ducts, which forms the uterovaginal canal. So the primitive uterus differentiates into two parts initially. So if you see here, okay, this is the uterus. So the two tubes fuse, the uterine and the middle septum, okay, where the line of fusion of both the paramesonephric ducts, it will form that uterine septum, which later on disappears and forms a single lumen of the uterus. Okay. So it will differentiate into two parts, the body and the cervix. In the fetus, right, the cervix is bigger than the body. Okay. Later on, the body develops. So this is the thing. Whereas the lower part forms the vagina. So we will see later how the vagina is formed. Okay, so the development of vagina when we see. Okay, so here this is the urogenital sinus. Okay, so the upper part of the upper part of the vagina is derived from which one? The paramesonephric duct. So now the lower portion. So the lower portion when we see, okay, so lower portion is in relation to which one? The urogenital sinus. Okay. So a solid near the caudal tip of the uterovaginal canal, what happens is when it comes in contact with the dorsal wall of the pelvic part of the definitive. Okay, so this is the dorsal wall. So this is the definitive urogenital sinus. So it comes in contact with this. Okay, so when it comes in contact with this definitive urogenital sinus, it induces the formation of two outgrowths from the dorsal wall. Okay, so these are the two outgrowths, which we call it as the sinovaginal bulbs. These are the endodermal cells of the sinovaginal bulbs. They will proliferate very rapidly and forms a solid plate, okay, of cells, which we call it as the vaginal plate. Now, the cells from the tip of this uterovaginal canal, okay, that is from the mesoderm, they proliferate and they also contribute to the this thing, vaginal plate. Okay, so now vaginal plate is where? Vaginal plate is between the uterovaginal canal and the urogenital sinus. Okay, so it is between these two. So this part we have the vaginal plate. So the vaginal plate, now it has got composed of two things. One is the mesoderm cells of the uterovaginal canal, whereas this one is endoderm. So it has got both mesodermal as well as endodermal origin. Now the upper end of the vaginal plate, okay, this upper end, it will expand and it surrounds the caudal end of this, okay. It surrounds the caudal end of which one? The uterovaginal canal. So that is what we call it as the vaginal fornix, okay. It forms the fornix. Now the central cells, okay, the central cells, now it's a plate. So the central cells of this caudal part, okay, breakdown of this vaginal plate, and by 5th month, the plate will be completely canalized, okay. So by 5th month, it gets completely canalized and it forms the lumen of the vagina, okay. So this one, which it grow like around the uterovaginal canal, that is the caudal end would have formed the cervix, so that will form the fornix of it. Okay. So this vagina, it will remain, okay, it will be remaining separated from the phallic part of the definitive urogenital sinus by a thin plate of tissue, which is called as the hymen. Okay, so this hymen basically consists of a thin layer of vaginal cells superiorly and epithelial lining of the urogenital sinus inferiorly. Okay, so both the surfaces. So we have both endodermal as well as the ectodermal lining. Okay. Sorry, both the surfaces are lined by endoderm. Sorry. Okay, both are lined by the endoderm. Okay, so this is the formation of the vagina. Okay, so what are the developmental anomalies we can see? Now, see, this is what happens is, this is called as the double uterus didelphys, okay, with double vagina, because the septum has not disappeared. The incomplete, both this is one paramesonephric duct, this is other one, okay. So they have not completely, it's not fused and separated, okay. So here single vagina, but double uterus. Here we have double uterus and single vagina, okay. So unicornuate, bicornuate uterus we say. So these are some of the developmental anomalies. Another anomalies because of the improper fusion, that is urorectal septum, it doesn't form completely. It results in rectovaginal fistula or vesico-vaginal fistula here. Okay. So these are all the different anomalies of the uterus. This is the congenital fistula, what I said, that is the vesico-vaginal from the vagina and the bladder, because that is where it communicates, right? So, and here rectum and the vagina, rectovaginal fistula. Okay, so to summarize, the mesodermal upper part of the vaginal plate, okay, which is derived from the uterovaginal canal, it forms the upper part of the vagina and fornix. Endodermal lower part of the vaginal plate derived from the sinovaginal bulge forms the lower part of the vagina. Thin plate of tissue separating the vagina and the phallic part forms the hymen. Then phallic part forms the vestibule of the vagina. Okay, so these are the structures derived. So it's the same thing, development of vagina, how the cords of cells and how the fornix is formed. Okay. And it opens to the outer, we will see. So this is the hymen. Okay, this is different types of hymen. We have annular, cribriform, septate hymen, imperforate hymen. Okay, this is after birth. Once giving birth, it results in this kind of hymen. This we see it in the non-pregnant women. Okay. Lastly, coming to the development of the female external genitalia. So female external genital organs develop from the indifferent stage. Okay, so here again, we have this genital tubercle. This is the urethral swellings and these are the genital swellings, right? This is the indifferent stage. So this genital tubercle, in males, it forms the penis, but here it forms the clitoris, okay? So here what happens, the genital tubercle, it elongates only slightly to form a small phallus, which bends and later forms the clitoris. The clitoris does not contain urethra. The primitive urethral folds, unlike in males, it doesn't fuse, okay? And they form the labia urethral folds will form the labia minora, whereas the genital swellings will enlarge. Okay, so the genital swellings will enlarge and they form the labia majora. The labia majora will fuse with each other. Okay, so this labia majora will fuse with each other posterior to the urogenital membrane. In this portion, it fuses, okay, to form the posterior labial commissure. So this is the posterior labial commissure. And the labia majora will overlap the labia minora. So urogenital membrane, now what happens, it ruptures so that the phallic part of the urogenital sinus forms the vestibule of the vagina. Okay, so the phallic part forms the vestibule of the vagina, which has the opening of both urethra as well as the vagina. Okay, so the labia minora will have outer ectodermal and inner endodermal lining. So this is the urogenital membrane phallic part. So it opens here. So this portion, that is the urethral fold, it will form the labia minora. Okay, and this forms the genital swellings, forms the labia majora. Okay, so this is the summary of male and female reproductive system. So if you see here, this is the indifferent gonads. So indifferent gonads in males and females. So indifferent gonads are derived from primordial germ cells. Primordial germ cells, here spermatogonia, here it is oogonia. Surface epithelium of the gonad, here it forms the Sertoli cells, here it forms the follicular cells. Mesenchyme forms the Leydig cells, they form the theca interna and externa. Gubernaculum forms the gubernaculum testis. In females, it remains as round ligament of uterus and round ligament of ovary. Mesonephric tubules, the cranial tubules, okay, efferent ductules, caudal tubules, paradidymis, here epiphoron, paraoophoron. Mesonephric duct, full duct system, duct of epididymis, vas, seminal vesicles, ejaculatory ducts. Here it forms the Gartner's duct. Paramesonephric duct forms the appendix of the testis and prostatic utricle. Here it forms the uterine tubes, uterus, cervix, upper part of the vagina. Okay. And urogenital sinus in males forms the urinary bladder, prostatic membranous and penile part of the urethra, prostate gland, bulbourethral glands. Here urinary bladder, only the membranous part of the urethra, vestibule of the vagina, paraurethral glands and greater vestibular glands. Mullerian tubercle, it forms the seminal colliculus. Here it forms the hymen. Genital tubercle forms penis. Here it forms clitoris. Urethral folds form penile urethra. Here it forms the labia minora. Genital swellings form scrotum. And here it forms the labia majora. Okay. So this is the female urethra. It's short. Already I told about the development. Okay. So I wouldn't go into the details. Okay. Right. So thank you for watching Auricle. For more social contents, you can follow our social media handles on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Telegram. And if you haven't yet downloaded the app, you can download the app on Google Play and App Store and start your journey with Auricle. So until then, next time.